Okay, thank you.
Very much, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Cohen, let me make sure I'm addressing the proper person. Yes, Ms. Cohen. Ms. Cohen, you were giving us some intelligence on legal fees and perhaps some other fees. Would you restate that again, please? Because I think a point was missed, and I'd like to, if I may, underscore it. Would you kindly give a number, and I know that you may not have empirical evidence to support a number that would be as pervasive and take in as much as we might want, but some indication as to how much these fees can be, please.
You know, maybe $5,000.
This is a good segue to the servicers. First, servicers, do you agree that the fees, for our purposes, let's just call them fees rather than many of the other things that we may, do you agree that these fees are added on as principal to the buyer? If you agree, if you disagree, raise your hand. That will be the person that I'll talk to. Let the record reflect that we have no hands, so I will assume that all agree with Ms. Cohen. Now, if this is true, if we have these additional fees tacked on, and if we are now proceeding to restructuring, Ms. Cohen, do we end up restructuring and having payments that are near or about the same as they were before we restructured? Do this for me. Explain, what does it mean when you say it's harder to afford? What does that mean, harder to afford the loan modification? I understand. Let me, before I come to you, sir, I know that you want to give a comment on this, but I have to go to the doctor from the Cato Institute, and I'll come back to you if I can. Is it Calabria?
Calabria.
All right. Sir, I've read your paper, and I must tell you that while I may not agree with all that you have contained therein, I think it's well thought through, and there's a line of logic that's consistent. And I have great appreciation for consistency in logic, and I appreciate the way you dealt with the arms and other aspects of what are ostensible causes of the crisis. But your conclusion is that negative equity and income shock, these are the causes of the current inability to restructure. Is that a fair statement?
I would say they're the predominant.
All right, predominant causes. I can read your exact words if you'd like me to. You indicate after, well, let me just start with a sentence. It is not exploding arms or predatory lending that drives the current wave of foreclosures, but negative equity driven by house prices declines coupled with adverse income shocks. You didn't use those qualifiers in your statement, but I respect the right that you have to use them now. So you would now qualify these statements?
I would stick with predominantly, and I would also add my emphasis there is on the foreclosures that aren't being addressed. Most of the things that
quickly, let me ask you this. You indicate that these two things must be addressed before we can be successful with these various plans. Is that correct? Do you also make this statement?
If you want to see more than just small numbers of marginal success, yes, then I would say yes. You
all right, great. Now tell me this quickly. How do you address the negative equity?
I think that's I want to be clear, a diagnosis does not always lead you to very clear treatment. So
I understand, but you're with the Cato Institute, you're a brilliant man, and I would respect having you give me an opinion. I may not agree with it.
Sure. One of the things I think is positive going on in the housing market is I believe we're through most of the depreciation.
My time is already up, so I have to ask you to go straight to negative equity. How would you address negative equity? Okay. And is it your opinion that what we're attempting to do with this program addresses negative equity?
I don't think it does. You're not necessarily putting the owner in a position where they have equity, because even most of...
Now I'm going to put you in an uncomfortable position, but you can handle it. But do you agree then that if a loan is modified such that negative equity is addressed, that there's a greater likelihood that the borrower can pay the loan? So then the borrower will have a greater incentive to stay in the home. You agree?
Yes.
All right. But your position is that this program is not getting us there. So now, whether you like it or not, if a person goes into a bankruptcy court and receives a stay, which will deal with all these other concerns that have been addressed, you get an automatic stay. Any additional efforts to foreclose are stalled, and then the loan is modified structurally through the bankruptcy court, wouldn't that give the person a greater incentive to stay in the home? Let's not talk about it as structure. Let's talk about a cram down, if you will. I don't like the term cram down. Bankruptcy is a form of
modification.
Okay, a bankruptcy that allows restructuring such that a person who can pay, and that's what we're talking about,
Sure.
so that people won't get confused and say that everybody's just going to run in and get bankruptcy and they're going to benefit from it, notwithstanding their inability to pay. You made a good point. Now, given that they can pay, would this give them a greater incentive to make their payments?
It all depends on whether...
Well, now, you just said that if a person, if a negative equity is dealt with, that would give the person greater incentive to pay. I understand. But if they modify such that there is equity, such that the person can now make payments, does the person have greater incentive? This is pursuant to what you have in your paper.
For those small number of people that
Yes.
fall into
Okay.
that...
Any number. Is that true?
For those any number of people that would fall in that category, that would provide them a greater incentive, yes.
Okay. And my final question to the other folks, if I may, Madam Chair, may I have one?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. My final question to those of you who are in the modification business, tell me if you agree that allowing bankruptcy will provide a means by which persons, let's assume that they've tried everything that is available without success, and they do file for bankruptcy, would this knowledge that the bankruptcy is an option, would the knowledge of a bankruptcy as an option, not you, but would it help some servicers to realize that maybe I can do a little bit more than I have been doing? And I'm trying to be as kind as I can in saying this because I don't want to create problems for people who are trying to do a job, and you all are. But let's start with the Bank of America representatives. Would this help some servicers and some investors to see that maybe we do have a little more latitude than we think we have in trying to modify some of these loans? My suspicion is that your colleagues would say a similar thing. If anyone would differ in terms of the banks, JP, Boston, if you would differ, raise your hand. If you don't differ, I won't bother to ask you the question. So nobody differs. No hands up. Let the record reflect, which gets to the point that I'd like to make. The servicers are not going to change. They're going to continue to do what they're doing. And if we know they're going to continue to do what they're doing, and we have about 8 million homes that may go into foreclosure within the next 4 years, then we have to do something different. We cannot allow all that we have done to try to revive the economy, to stabilize the economy, to become the sole province of servicers who are not going to change their method of operation. I respect what you want to do and what you're trying to do, but at some point, those of us who are in the arena, who have to make these tough calls, we are going to have to make another call and give people another option, just as you have with your second home, your third home, your fourth home, just as you have with your auto payment, just as you have with your farm loan. All of these options are available to people except the lowly person who can't afford a second home, third home, fourth home, who can't afford a farm, who may not have a fine car to drive, but has something called a primary residence that he or she or they're trying to protect. These people need help too. That's what we've got to look at. And I appreciate where you are, and I thank each of you. My time has expired. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for appearing again. I trust that all is well with you and your family. Mr. Chairman, I sense a hint of exasperation with you in terms of your having to continually express that you are opposed to too big to fail. trying to get that message out has been quite a challenge for me too, and in that I'm opposed to too big to fail. And the temptation is there to use what I call a mnemonic device, a memory aiding device. However, mnemonic devices will only help a person have a better sense of memory. It won't force the person to use memory. And I suspect that a lot of the people that continually misunderstand my position are doing so with a certain amount of design as opposed to a lack of memory. But for the record, I too am opposed to too big to fail for the nth time. Now, having said this, some of my colleagues on the other side are also talking about jobs and the recovery as though jobs are a leading indicator. I think that it's fairly well documented that jobs are a lagging indicator. But for the record, Mr. Chairman, have we ever had a recovery from a recession wherein jobs were a leading indicator? Exactly. The market, stock prices, are generally speaking pro-cyclical, but unemployment is generally speaking counter-cyclical. So I want to talk for just a quick moment about counter-cyclicality, in that when a policy is counter-cyclical, it will cool down an economy that is in an upswing, and it will stimulate an economy that is in a downturn. If this is the case, when we require banks to increase their capital ratio in a recession, while it may be a good thing to do, it can also prove to be pro-cyclical in that it can offset some of the lending that might take place. Would you just kindly give a quick comment on this, the capital requirement? Because if you'll recall, we started out with a TARP fund that became a capital purchase program that dealt with capital requirements, and that may have had some impact on the lending side of banking, if you would, please. Yes, sir. In fact, this is why, one of the reasons why Basel II has been criticized, because it advocates this. But moving on, dark liquidity, an interesting term, has to do with capital that I call quiet money that's placed in the market. Did dark liquidity have an impact on this circumstance that we're dealing with currently?
Do you mean dark pools? Is that
Yes.
what you're referring to?
Yes, sir. Final comment, with reference to small banks and community banks, I want to thank you for your efforts to avoid having them become bear the burden, if you will, of a lot of what has happened when they, in fact, were, in the main, not the cause of this downturn that we're suffering from. I've had an opportunity to meet with many of the community bankers, and one of the things that they continually say to me is, look, don't have us punished for the sins of others. We've been here, we're doing a good job, we're maintaining a lot of loans in our portfolio, so please don't let it happen to us. And I thank you for your efforts in this area. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Manzullo. Next, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and the ranking member for hosting the hearing. Mr. Bowman, I respect you for speaking up for and standing up for your employees. How many are we talking about? And I'm going to ask that you answer as quickly as possible because I have a series of questions that are of concern. How many employees are we talking about?
I believe as of tomorrow it'll be 1,040, approximately.
And is it your opinion that under the current proposal, these employees will not receive a fair and equitable transition? For additional edification, when you say others, are we talking about clerks? Are we talking about, tell me what the others
We're talking about
consist of.
economists.
And have you examined any information or any document that would help someone such as myself who's concerned, something that you have codified that might help me to help those employees? Is there something available? All right. I will be candid with you. That may be difficult at this point, but I would like to hear more about what you propose, and I will look to work with you and your office and to see what we can do.
Thank you.
Now,
we look forward to that.
Thank you. And
I will come to you, Mr. Dugan. Let me ask one quick question because I have to make sure that I get this in. Comment first. Too big to fail, without question, is the right size to regulate. It's also the right size to eliminate. I'm of the opinion that we absolutely want to prevent ever having too big to fail. And the question becomes, can we allow institutions to grow so large that they can be resolved and not cost the taxpayers dollars? The paradigm that we are proposing provides for resolution. The question that the taxpayers are interested in is this: if we had in place what we are proposing, would we be able to wind down AIG and not use 1 penny of taxpayer money? Ms. Baer? And if you can give me a yes or a no, I know everyone is tempted to give a long
Yes,
explanation.
yes.
Your,
Yes.
your opinion is yes, we could with the current proposal. All right, Mr. Dugan? All right, sir. Final comment, and then Mr. Dugan, is this. Once that list is codified, my assumption is that it will become public knowledge. Once more than one person knows about it, in the world that we live in today, things just don't remain esoteric. And I think we should provide for the possibility that it will be public more than private. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If any other witnesses care to respond to Mr. Green's question, you're welcome to do that for the record.